are allowed to think big and dream big. How to generate different systems. Systems that provide stability and are nested within the harmony of nature. I'm excited to explore with you the intriguing bandwidth of information our researchers and friends have surfaced. Let's dive into our next topic to find out how we can actively shape a future worth pursuing and living for.
They might cure depression in the future, they kill bacteria, and they may be the key to save our bees. They also help plants to grow and defend themselves, they clean up polluted soils and water, and they play a major role in taking CO2 out of the atmosphere. They might even help us overthrow capitalism, but that's a different story. And they taste good. I'm Teresa, and in this episode I will talk about what the fungi we walk on do exactly down there below our feet, and how they can help us change for the better. And I will not go into all those things I just mentioned because they will probably take months and years to cover in a podcast. Instead, I decided to start local. And when thinking about whom I could speak to about fungi, I quickly came across Malte Larsen. And first, to introduce Malte, he is part of Microbiomic, an association with the aim of supporting participatory science and making visible, especially those organisms that usually are not visible. For example, bacteria, nematodes, springtails, but also fungi. And in 2018, with a friend, Malte won the Galileo Wissenspreis for creating mushroom material. And these days he co-founded a startup where he is cultivating soils with different microbiomes and also fungi among them to restore and improve degraded soils, especially in urban areas. And one of the first questions, quite obviously, that I asked Malte was how his interest in mushrooms and fungal networks actually started.
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think for me it was in Ireland. I was traveling before I studied in Eberswalde, and I was hitchhiking in Ireland, and a landscape photographer picked me up, and he said, I can drive you there and there, but I'll have to stop at the most beautiful spots to take pictures if you don't mind. And yeah, of course I said yes. And while I was driving with him, he actually taught me everything about magic mushrooms. And I've never heard of it before, and I was quite young at the time, so it was like in my early 20s, and I was just very surprised. I mean, I didn't even know what to do with that information, but he basically told me that I should look out for mushrooms that look like nipples on the field at a specific time. And when I came back to Germany, I actually found some of those. And I think this is where my journey began, and I started to understand what a tremendous impact mushrooms can have. I mean, on our psyche, on our vision, on everything that is regarded with our senses and our self-understanding. And I mean, there's so many implications, and it just got me really curious into like growing mushrooms myself. And I had, what followed were years of try and error to grow mushrooms myself. And it was actually when I came here to Eberswalde that I started growing mushrooms. And I had so many fails. It's incredible. Like so many, so much mold that I was growing instead of the mushroom that I wanted to grow. And after years of doing this and pursuing this passion of growing mushrooms, I went pretty successful in the end, because suddenly I really understood the mushroom, like what the mushroom likes. And that was a big step forward, a big milestone in my mushroom growing career, I would say. So what actually happened is I tried some ideas for startups. So I really went into mushroom materials.
And what do you think is the potential scope, for example, of those mushroom materials, or also of the mushroom-induced soils, like thinking bigger?
Mm-hmm. Well, if I take the fungal composting, for example, I mean, I can just talk about that in specific, where I see the potential impacts. If we look at soils around the world, a lot of those soils are depleted, and fungi play a tremendously important role in soils. And by actually growing those organisms and reintroducing them, as I said earlier, you can actually restore soil functions. And that also means the sequestering of carbon and long-term storage of that. Then to improve the water uptake and storage in soils. Soil organisms actually contribute to micro and macro aggregates in soils. They kind of build like a whole matrix. It's a three-dimensional space that they actually shape with their activities. So fungi, they not only conquer new areas in the soil and explore for minerals that a tree cannot access, they can also access really fine areas in the soil that a root can't penetrate into. And you have this critical mass of soil organisms that if you have a certain degree, like a community with a certain amount of individuals, and I'm speaking about bacteria, for example, then you have so-called like community effects that are happening. So the whole system becomes much more resilient because they can actually react on pathogens that are coming into the system, or they can also react to like other physical circumstances like drought or anything else.
As I would understand, you think that this hype about fungi is justified?
Yeah, as it is often and always with humans, we love new things, and sometimes the enthusiasm is probably focused on the wrong end of the thing, the thing that we can see, but the true potential probably lies where we can't see, So I mean, there's so much going on. I mean, we should be really thankful for the work that the mushrooms are doing. I mean, all the antibiotics, like there's so many like medical things that we owe them, and we don't see it. I mean, it's microorganisms doing the work, and we should really be more curious about the microbial world. It's a venture into another universe, really. I mean, if you have a microscope and you put a soil sample under it, it's just amazing what's happening down there. Like, there's so much going on. This is what we do at Microbiomic as well. We really aim to give people a curiosity, like give them tools, give them microscopes, send them out into the field, collect their own soil samples, and make them curious about this gigantic universe that's beneath our feet, which is just mind-blowing.
So how I understand it is that this mushroom and fungi hype, it's really only focused on the nice, colorful mushrooms, but it kind of leaves out the things we don't see, which actually are not only in the fungal world, but maybe also in the bacteria, which are still overlooked. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would totally agree. I mean, we like to watch ice bears, and dolphins and like all the super nice creatures, that we love. But there's just so much more. And if once we get an understanding of like the complexity and interactions in ecosystems, we can probably grasp why the biodiversity is so important. I mean, really question what does biodiversity means? Like, why are the interactions so important? And like, if I should condense it, it's really the more complex a system is, usually the more stable it becomes. And it doesn't matter. You can actually scale those effects to larger ecosystems or to your gut. And if you take antibiotics and you kill a lot of bacteria in your gut, you destabilize the system and it becomes imbalanced. And so I think, it is really about the complexity of life that we should acknowledge. We shouldn't pick single individual organisms and hype them too much. It's like the deeper you go and the more you understand, you can actually better assess what the potential benefit is.
But talking about the economical challenges, what are your thoughts on those talks or those ideas about how mycelium, for example, can change our view about collaboration? That I think there's even connections being made between how our economy works and how mycelium works, and how mycelium can show us how to better work. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I would say there's definitely a lot of romanticism in there, and I wouldn't agree that fungi and trees are always having like super beneficial and lovely relationships. There's a lot of situations where a fungi, can be in a symbiotic relationship with a tree, but it can also turn pathogenic, So it's probably also not a bad thing if it sparks more interest in the field. But yeah, I think reality is often more complicated than we probably would like to have it.
So yeah, reality is complicated and hypes are more complex than they sometimes seem to be in the first place. But we can at least conclude that microorganisms are underrated. And if you want to know more about them and the role they play in the soil, there are 2 texts that Malte also mentioned. One is a book called Dirt by David R. Montgomery about the rise and the fall of civilizations in relation to how they treat their soil. And the second one is a paper by Heidi Jane Hawkins and other fungi researchers about the mycorrhizal, so the fungi-tree relations, mycelium as a global carbon pool. And I will put both texts as well as some of my other favorite literature in the show notes. And with this, I thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this little journey to the world below our feet. And if you haven't done it already, check out the other episodes as well.